I never should have agreed to that shift. It was a last-minute favor for Rachel, a nurse who was supposed to work the night shift at St. Catherine's Hospital. But she had an emergency, and I could use the overtime. So there I was, driving through the pouring rain, my heart heavy with the kind of unease you can't quite put into words. St. Catherine's had a reputation even among the staff. An old hospital, barely lit in some corners, and prone to odd occurrences no one could explain. People joked about it being haunted. I never believed in that sort of thing until that night. The moment I stepped inside, something felt off. The fluorescent lights flickered in the lobby, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the walls. The air was damp, like the hospital had been holding its breath for years. The receptionist wasn't at her desk, which was strange, but not alarming. Yet, I made my way to the staff lounge to clock in, but as I reached the main hallway, I heard it. A faint tapping sound, like fingernails on glass. Tap, tap, tap. It echoed through the empty corridor. "Hello," I called out, my voice bouncing back at me, tinny and small. No answer. Shrugging it off as my imagination, I continued down the hall. The lights above buzzed and dimmed with each step. As I passed the ICU, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. Movement behind the frosted glass of room 307. A shadow. The patient in that room was supposed to be comatose. I froze. My feet planted themselves to the cold tile floor as my brain wrestled with logic. "You imagined it," I told myself. "This late, you're tired. That's all." But the shadow didn't feel like something I imagined. Felt real. Summoning what courage I had, I stepped closer to room 307. The sound of my sneakers squeaking against the polished floor felt deafening in the eerie silence. The ICU was supposed to have at least one nurse on duty, but the desk was empty, the monitors on standby. The hum of machinery was the only sound, a background buzz that somehow made the quiet even heavier. Standing outside the frosted glass, I peeked inside. The bed was empty. That shouldn't have been possible. The patient in room 307, Mr. Chambers, was a long-term coma case. No way he could have just gotten up and walked out. I checked the chart hanging on the door. Chambers had been stable during the last recorded vitals check at 6 p.m. It was now almost midnight. I stepped into the room. The bed was disheveled. The sheets crumpled in a way that suggested movement. The faint smell of antiseptic mixed with something metallic. Blood. My stomach churned as I noticed a smear of dark red trailing from the bed to the floor. The blood led to the corner of the room. A sound, a low, raspy breath, made me whip my head toward it. The heart monitor beeped faintly in the corner, where the wires lay tangled and dripping. There, crouched in the shadowed recess of the room, was Mr. Chambers, or at least something that looked like him. His eyes snapped up to meet mine, and my blood turned to ice. His pupils were blown wide, almost swallowing the whites of his eyes, and his face twisted into something unnatural. His jaw slack like it had unhinged itself. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Only that awful, rasping breath. His skin looked wet, glistening under the faint glow of the emergency light. But what chilled me most was his movements, jerky, inhuman, like he wasn't used to controlling his own body. "Mr. Chambers?" My voice cracked, betraying the terror surging through me. He didn't respond. Instead, he straightened up too fast, too fluid. And then he started walking toward me. No, not walking. Lurching. I backed away instinctively, the cold metal door handle digging into my palm as I fumbled for the exit. "Stay right there," I said, as if commanding him would make this grotesque nightmare stop. He didn't. Then the lights went out. For a moment, the darkness swallowed everything. The room, the hallway, even my sense of balance. My breathing came in sharp, shallow gasps, the kind you can't control when panic sets in. Somewhere in the blackness, I heard that raspy breathing again, now impossibly close. "Move," my brain screamed. "Move now." I scrambled for my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, trembling as it illuminated the room. Chambers was no longer in the corner. He was right in front of me. I stumbled backward, the light catching every horrifying detail of his face. His mouth was stretched into a grotesque grin, his teeth jagged and stained. His neck twisted unnaturally as he cocked his head to the side, staring at me with eyes that didn't blink. The blood I'd noticed earlier streaked his hospital gown, smeared across his arms and hands. His clawed hands, fingers curling in ways human hands shouldn't. "Mr. Chambers?" I whispered, though I knew whatever stood in front of me wasn't him anymore. He lunged. I barely managed to sidestep, slamming into the bed frame as he crashed into the door. His body moved with a strength and speed that didn't belong to a man who'd been comatose for months. I darted out of the room, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. The hallway was just as dark, but my phone's flashlight carved a shaky path through the void. Behind me, I heard the door slam open. His uneven footsteps echoed in the hallway, faster than I expected. They seemed to come from everywhere at once, bouncing off the walls in the oppressive silence. I turned down a corridor, my shoes skidding on the slick floor, and bolted toward the nurse's station. "Help!" I yelled, my voice breaking. "Somebody, help me!" The nurse's station was empty. The whole floor was empty. Desks were overturned, papers scattered like a storm had blown through. Monitors flickered weakly, their screens filled with static. I grabbed the desk phone and slammed it against my ear, but the line was dead. Not even a dial tone. Desperate, I scanned the room for anything I could use. A weapon, a key, something to call for help. Then I saw it. A heavy metal flashlight sitting on the edge of the counter. I snatched it up, gripping it tightly like a lifeline. The footsteps were louder now, accompanied by a sickening wet sound, like flesh dragging against tile. I turned, my phone's light shaking in my hand. Chambers was at the end of the hall, his body silhouetted by the faint glow of the emergency exit sign. His head twitched, his neck snapping to one side, then the other, like he was struggling to control himself. But his eyes, they were locked on me, and they were hungry. I didn't wait. I bolted toward the stairwell, my breath hitching with every step. As I reached the heavy metal door, I slammed it open, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the cavernous stairwell. I didn't care. I just had to get out. Behind me, the door creaked open again. He was following. The stairwell was a nightmare of echoes. My frantic footsteps, the slam of the metal door behind me, and his relentless pursuit. Every sound amplified, each one driving me further into a frenzy. I couldn't tell how far back he was, but the wet slapping of his bare feet on the concrete steps was enough to keep me moving. I didn't look back. Couldn't. The stairwell was dimly lit by a flickering bulb, casting sporadic flashes of light that turned the shadows into grotesque shapes. My flashlight swung wildly as I descended, the beam dancing over the walls. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for rest, but fear was a stronger motivator than exhaustion. I gripped the metal flashlight in one hand, ready to use it if I had to. Suddenly, I heard it, a guttural growl, low and primal, reverberating through the stairwell. It wasn't human. Whatever Chambers had become, it was something far worse. The sound of him closing in, his footsteps growing erratic, forced me to push harder, faster. I rounded another flight of stairs and saw it, the ground floor exit. A glowing red exit sign perched above the door like a beacon of salvation. Relief surged through me. I was so close, but so was he. The growling turned into a shriek, high-pitched and otherworldly, echoing off the stairwell walls. It was enough to send a fresh jolt of terror through me. I reached the door, slammed into it with all my weight, and threw it open. I stumbled into the main lobby, the hospital's cold, empty expanse stretching out before me. For a moment I thought I'd made it. The lobby was eerily still, the rain pounding against the large glass doors at the entrance. I could see my car in the parking lot, just a few yards away. Then I heard the shriek again, impossibly loud. I turned, and Chambers was there, standing in the doorway to the stairwell. He looked worse now, his body contorted, skin stretched tight over protruding bones. His jaw hung open unnaturally wide, and his eyes, Those black, soulless pits. They bored into me, promising something worse than death. He lunged. I swung the metal flashlight with everything I had, catching him across the face. The impact was sickening, a crunch of bone and wet flesh, but it barely slowed him. He clawed at me, his jagged nails raking across my arm. Pain flared, but adrenaline kept me moving. I swung again, this time hitting his temple. He staggered, just enough for me to break free and bolt toward the entrance. The glass doors wouldn't open. The automatic sensors were dead. No, no, no. I slammed the flashlight against the glass in a desperate attempt to shatter it. The tempered glass cracked, spiderwebbing under the force, but it held. Behind me, Chambers let out another guttural howl, and I could hear him closing the distance. In a panic, I threw my body against the door, using everything I had left. The glass finally gave way with an explosive crash, and I tumbled out into the rain. Sharp shards bit into my skin, but I didn't care. I scrambled to my feet and ran for my car, fumbling for my keys. I could hear him behind me, the wet slap of his feet on the pavement mixing with the storm's roar. I yanked the car door open, threw myself inside, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life. Just as Chambers reached the car, his clawed hand slamming against the window, I hit the gas. The tires screeched, and the car lurched forward. In the rearview mirror, I saw him chasing me, his distorted body illuminated by the taillights. But he couldn't keep up. He slowed, then stopped, standing in the middle of the rain-soaked parking lot, watching as I sped away. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town over. I pulled into a diner parking lot and sat there, trembling, blood drying on my arms. I could still hear the echoes of his growls, see the hunger in his eyes. I called the police. They investigated, but no trace of Chambers was ever found. They chalked it up to exhaustion on my part, stress-induced hallucinations. But I know what I saw, what I survived. I quit that job the next morning, and I never went back to St. Catherine's. But sometimes, late at night, I'll hear a faint tapping sound, like fingernails on glass, and I can't help but wonder if Chambers is still out there, waiting for me.